I stood alone at the defendant's table with a folder of photocopied lease documents shaking slightly in my hands, no attorney beside me, no one in that entire courtroom on my side except a stranger's promise that representing myself was still better than not showing up at all. You can do this. You've read every page of that lease 4 times. You know what's true, even if you don't know how to say it the way lawyers do. The opposing counsel, a sharp, unhurried man named Dale Prentice, sat comfortably at the plaintiff's table beside a representative from Kessler Development Group, both of them glancing over at me with the particular, practiced indifference of people who'd done this 100 times before and expected today to be no different. Before we continue, if you enjoy stories about family secrets, unexpected justice, and moments when people finally face the consequences of their choices, make sure you subscribe to StorySpark. And stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. Then the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Miriam Voss walked in, black robes settling around her as she took her seat at the bench. She looked at me for a long moment before the proceedings even began, longer than seemed necessary, longer than a judge glancing over a docket typically would. "Ms. Marsh," she said, her voice quiet, almost careful. "You don't remember me? My name is Lydia Marsh. I run a flower shop on the corner of 4th and Mill in Beloit, Wisconsin, Marsh and Bloom, the same shop my late husband Paul and I opened together 12 years ago, back when we were young enough to believe 2 people with almost no savings and a lot of stubbornness could actually make something like that work. We did make it work for a while. Paul died of a heart attack 4 years ago, sudden and impossible to prepare for, leaving me to run the shop alone while raising our 12-year-old daughter, Ellie, and slowly, carefully rebuilding a life I hadn't planned on rebuilding by myself. I got through the worst years already. I told myself the shop, at least, was the one thing that was finally stable again. I was wrong about that too, as it turned out. Kessler Development Group bought the building my shop occupied 8 months ago, part of a larger redevelopment plan for that entire block of downtown Beloit. My lease, signed 3 years earlier with the previous landlord, still had 2 years remaining on its term, a detail I'd confirmed, more than once, sitting at my kitchen table with the original paperwork spread out in front of me, making sure I understood exactly what protection I actually had. 2 years left. Clear terms. I checked this so many times I could recite the renewal clause from memory. Then, 5 months ago, a letter arrived informing me that Kessler Development had identified what they described as a documented lease violation that voided my remaining term and required immediate vacancy within 60 days. I called the number on the letter. I visited their office in person twice. Nobody would explain, in any specific terms, what violation they were actually referring to. Something's wrong here. This isn't how landlords who actually have a legitimate case usually behave. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I want to say that plainly, without embarrassment, because it's the truth that shaped almost every decision I made over those 5 months. Paul's death had already stretched our finances thin, and between Ellie's school expenses and keeping the shop's bills current, I had nothing left over for the kind of legal representation Kessler Development clearly expected me not to have. I called every legal aid organization within an hour of Beloit. Most had waitlists stretching months beyond my 60-day deadline. One attorney agreed to a single 30-minute consultation, charged me $200 I genuinely couldn't spare, and told me, honestly, that commercial lease disputes like mine were complicated enough that representing myself would be difficult, though not impossible if I stayed extremely organized. Extremely organized. That's the only kind of lawyer I can actually afford to be. I spent those 5 months building the most thorough self-representation I possibly could, reading Wisconsin commercial tenancy law late into the night after Ellie went to bed, organizing every piece of correspondence with Kessler Development into careful, labeled folders, practicing how to speak clearly and calmly about facts I understood better than almost anyone in that courtroom would expect from someone standing there without a law degree. I can't outlaw their attorney, but I can out-prepare him, if preparation is the only weapon I actually have access to. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late September, the Rock County Courthouse quieter than I expected walking in, my hands cold despite the warm early autumn air outside. I checked in with a bailiff, found my seat at the defendant's table, and spent the 20 minutes before proceedings began running through my documents one more time, trying to steady a heartbeat that refused to slow down no matter how many times I reminded myself I'd prepared for exactly this moment. Dale Prentice, Kessler Development's attorney, arrived precisely on time, greeting the court clerk with easy familiarity, clearly a regular presence in that courtroom. He glanced at me once, briefly, with an expression that told me exactly how confident he felt about how today was going to go. She's not going to just rule in my favor because of one snowy night 14 years ago. She's handling this exactly the way she's supposed to, carefully, transparently, by the book. If you were in her position, would you have remembered a stranger's kindness 14 years later, or would that night have faded away completely? Tell me what you would do in the comments. And if you're invested in this story, subscribe to Story Spark, because the next revelation changes everything. Dale Prentice requested a short recess to consult with his client, and Judge Voss granted it, calling me briefly into her chambers before the courtroom fully cleared. "Ms. Marsh," she said, once the door closed behind us, her judicial composure softening slightly. "I need to say something to you plainly, off the record. I remember what you did for me that night, and it mattered more than you probably ever realized. But I also need you to understand that I cannot let that memory influence how I rule on your case today. If I did that, it wouldn't actually be justice. It would just be a different kind of unfairness. She's telling me not to expect favoritism. I understand that. I think, honestly, I respect it more than I would have respected the alternative. I do want to help you in a way that's actually appropriate, though," she continued. "You're representing yourself against experienced commercial counsel in a dispute this complicated. That's not a fair fight, regardless of the facts underneath it. I'm going to grant a continuance so you can secure proper representation, and I'm going to personally reach out to a colleague who runs a pro bono commercial litigation clinic through the County Bar Association. That's not special treatment based on our history. That's simply making sure this proceeding is fair, which is something I'd do for any self-represented party-facing counsel this experienced. That's not a favor. That's what actually fair looks like, and it's more than I've gotten from anyone in this entire process so far. The continuance gave me 3 additional weeks, and the pro bono referral connected me 2 days later with an attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran, the same sharp, unflappable commercial litigator who, though neither of us realized it at the time we first spoke, had helped several other people I knew navigate exactly this kind of impossible situation. This is real help. Not a shortcut. Just an actual fighting chance. Priya reviewed every document I'd organized over the previous 5 months, impressed, she told me honestly, by how thorough my own preparation already was. But what she found within the first week of digging into Kessler Development's claim went far beyond anything I'd uncovered on my own. The documented lease violation Kessler Development had cited in their original letter referenced an addendum to my lease, a clause restricting subletting that I had allegedly violated by hosting a single weekend flower arranging class in my shop 18 months earlier, a class I'd taught for extra income during a particularly difficult stretch after Paul's death. I remember that class. It was one Saturday afternoon. 6 students. Nothing close to subletting. But the addendum itself, when Priya pulled the original recorded lease from the County Register of Deeds, didn't match. The version Kessler Development had submitted to the court included an entire subletting restriction clause that simply didn't exist in the lease I'd actually signed 3 years earlier. "Lydia," Priya said, spreading both versions across her desk, "I think Kessler Development submitted an altered document to this court. And if I can prove that, this isn't just a lease dispute anymore." The rescheduled hearing took place 3 weeks later, the courtroom fuller this time, Priya beside me at the defendant's table, Dale Prentice noticeably less relaxed than he'd been the first time around, glancing occasionally toward his client with an expression I recognized immediately from every difficult case I'd ever watched unfold from the sidelines of my own life. He knows something's wrong now too. That's not the confidence of a man who trusts his own evidence anymore. Judge Voss took her seat, her demeanor carefully professional, giving no indication whatsoever of the conversation we'd had in her chambers 3 weeks earlier. That, more than anything else, told me exactly how seriously she was treating the ethical line she'd drawn for herself. She's not going to make this easy for me because of who I am to her. She's just going to make sure it's fair. That's actually more than enough. Priya opened by presenting the two versions of the lease side by side, the original document recorded with the County Register of Deeds 3 years earlier, and the version Kessler Development had submitted as evidence of my alleged violation. Your Honor, Priya said, the subletting restriction clause cited in the plaintiff's original complaint does not appear anywhere in the lease Ms. Marsh actually signed. It appears, based on formatting and font inconsistencies my office has already had independently verified by a document examiner, to have been added after the fact. The courtroom went very quiet. Dale Prentice requested a private conference with the judge and opposing counsel, his composure visibly shaken now, and when court resumed 20 minutes later, his tone had shifted entirely. Your Honor, he said carefully, my client would like to withdraw the current complaint and revisit this matter through direct negotiation with Ms. Marsh outside of court. They know exactly what's about to happen if this goes to a full ruling. They're trying to make it disappear quietly instead. Judge Voss's expression remained carefully neutral, though something sharper moved behind her eyes. Mr. Prentice, given the serious nature of what's been presented today, specifically, evidence suggesting an altered legal document was submitted to this court as the basis for termination proceedings, a simple withdrawal isn't sufficient. I'm dismissing the complaint with prejudice, meaning Kessler Development cannot refile this claim. I'm also referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for review regarding the submission of potentially falsified evidence in a civil proceeding. Whatever internal handling led to that document being altered, your client needs to understand this court takes that seriously, regardless of who benefited from the change. She's not showing me favoritism. She's just refusing to let a fraudulent document succeed in her courtroom, which is exactly what any fair judge should do. What happened over the following months unfolded with the kind of quiet, methodical inevitability that comes after fraud finally gets exposed properly. The District Attorney's Office opened a formal review into Kessler Development's submitted document, ultimately resulting in a substantial settlement negotiated on my behalf by Priya, not just a dismissal of the original claim, but real compensation for the months of stress, legal costs, and lost business the fraudulent proceeding had caused me. Kessler Development's regional manager, the person Priya's investigation eventually traced the altered document back to, was terminated within the month, and the company issued a formal, public apology as part of the settlement agreement, along with a commitment to independently audit every commercial lease dispute currently in their pipeline across the state. They thought a self-represented flower shop owner with no lawyer was an easy target. They had no idea how much damage one thorough, honest woman with good documentation could actually do once she got real help. My lease was reinstated for its full remaining term, plus an additional year negotiated as part of the settlement, giving Marsh and Bloom a stability I hadn't felt since before Paul died. I saw Judge Voss one more time after the case formally closed, not in her courtroom, but at a small coffee shop near the courthouse where I'd stopped on my way to pick Ellie up from school. She was alone at a corner table, reviewing what looked like case files, and she looked up as I passed, offering a small, genuine smile. "Ms. Marsh," she said. "I'm glad this resolved the way it did. Can I sit for a minute?" I asked. She nodded, gesturing to the seat across from her. "I want you to know," I said, "I finally remembered your name properly, going back through old memories these last few weeks. But I think what I actually remember most isn't your name. It's how scared you looked that night, and how much it seemed to matter that someone believed you could still make it. That's the part that actually mattered. Not the specific words. Just that someone was there. It mattered more than you know," Judge Voss said quietly. "And Lydia, I want to say this clearly, now that the case is fully closed and there's no ethical concern about saying it. What you did that night wasn't really about giving me a ride home or a cup of coffee. It was about believing in someone at the exact moment they'd stopped believing in themselves. I've tried to carry that forward in this job more times than you'd probably guess." I think about that conversation often now, months later, standing behind the counter at Marsh and Bloom on ordinary afternoons, arranging flowers for customers who have no idea what almost happened to the shop earlier this year. 14 years ago, I helped a stranger I never expected to see again. I had no idea that kindness was quietly waiting, all that time, to come back around exactly when I needed it most. I don't think the lesson here is that kindness guarantees anything in return. Most of the people I've helped over the years, I'll never see again, and that's never been the reason to help in the first place. But I do think about how close I came to losing everything Paul and I built, represented by nothing but my own careful preparation and stubborn refusal to give up, and how a fair, ethical judge, one who happened to remember a snowy night 14 years earlier, made sure that preparation actually got a real chance to matter. Not because she owed me anything, because she understood, better than almost anyone, exactly what it costs to walk into a room alone and hope somebody finally sees you clearly. Ellie asked me recently why I still keep a small, faded photograph of the shop from our very first winter open, tucked into the corner of the register where I see it every single day. I told her it reminds me that the hardest nights don't always stay hard forever. Sometimes they're just quietly waiting, 14 years down the road, to come back around as exactly the kind of help you didn't know you'd already earned. If this story reminded you that kindness has a way of finding its way back to you when you least expect it, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had a moment like this in your own life? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Story Spark for more powerful stories about family, secrets, justice, and unexpected consequences. And remember, the person you helped today might be the exact person who shows up for you when you need it most.